We can be brothers and sisters, we can be united, but united together in our difference. They can be who they are, they can keep their language, their culture, their traditions, and we can be who we are, and we are better, we are enriched by the fact that we can form this unity in diversity. But a challenge for the church, how do we be able to be led to make a choice? There's the long history of 2,000 years ago. Fast forward another 2,000 years and talk a little bit about my own personal experience. As I said, growing up in a good traditional Catholic family, joining the Jesuits because I met them at Royal Hall, they were offering retreats, close to my home, and I think, well, that's nice, I'd like to be right there, I'd like to give retreats like that, close to home, that's what I do. I joined the Jesuits. Joined the Jesuits, coming into this time after studying philosophy, to be sent to work, have some experience of what it is actually to be engaged in the life of the Jesuits, and asked to go to Guyana. I asked Mauricio if he could come up, because if you were like me at that time, you might not be too sure where Guyana is. And when you want to go to Africa, well, it's not in Africa, it is on the top corner of South America. The three Guyana, Suriname, and French Guyana. One speaking English, one speaking Dutch, and one speaking French. So we can't call them Latin America, anything Spanish or Portuguese. They are this unique reality, this remnants of the colonial struggle. And they're much more focused on the Caribbean than on South America. Because when the French and the British and the Dutch were colonizing the Caribbean, they weren't interested in occupying the land, really they just wanted to plant their sugarcane and take the sugar and make money from what they could do along that small strip of coast. And bringing slaves from Africa to be the labour force to plant the sugarcane. The beginnings of those field pieces on the top corner. So that's where I was asked to go, and happy to go there. And when I arrived, well, what am I supposed to do here? Well, okay, try and work around what it is to be a priest in this context. Working on the coast initially, where you have this tension between the descendants of the African slaves, the descendants of labourers brought from India. And what is it for them to form a community in difference? So their important contribution to the Catholic Church to offer this vision of it's possible for us to be brothers and sisters in our differences. We don't all have to be the same, but we don't have to feel threatened by people who are different from ourselves. We can, in fact, live together. Great challenge for the church to do that, though, because the forces, as the colonial powers have left, and we want to leave a country that is not going to be like Cuba, well, wanting to drive that wedge between the Afro and the East Indian. And how does the church try to be a force that is trying to bring people together to overcome that division and that hatred? That was the great focus of the work on the coast. But then I was asked to go into the interior. So to go to the interior, well, if you fly, you have it easy, because you can fly for 2 hours across rainforest, because 75% of Guyana is this untouched rainforest, and then you reach Brazil, and then you find indigenous communities, Amerindian people. And people who, because of the long history of Guyana, in one sense, continue their traditional way of life. They are subsistence farmers. They grow their cassava, they reap their cassava, they make the drink, and they live their life. Still speaking their own language, Patamona, still speaking Kushi, still speaking Wapisha. And again, now the next challenge. What am I supposed to be doing here in this community? Something that's very different from what's going on the coast. Why am I here? What is the church doing here? Well, in one sense, the church is there because the people have asked the church to be there. That's one of the great graces of the church in Guyana. When the indigenous people in Venezuela had to flee from Venezuela at the time of Simon Bolivar, they came already as Catholics, settled in a place called Muruca, and they asked for a Catholic priest to come to minister to them, because their identity as indigenous people, yes, we have our land, we're growing our cassava, but we've come with a faith, and that faith is important to us, and we want to continue to practice that faith. We want a priest to be with us, to celebrate the sacraments with us. So that invitation for the priest to come. And then from that group, Well, priests going to the interior, working with the Amerindian people on the border with Brazil, and establishing schools and bringing teachers from the coastal indigenous community to establish an education system with the indigenous people in the interior. Beautiful history, and to be invited to be a part of that. It's not something, in one sense, imposed on the people. This is something that is integral to their way of life. They have taken the message of Christ to love one another as he has loved us, to live and to share and to care for one another, and that, in one sense, life in the community is natural to what they are practicing. And this good news and this gospel is something that, yes, makes sense to us as indigenous people. So beautiful for me to be able to be part of that process. And through being part of that process, well, undergo that process of conversion. To be able to let go of what I understand by being a Catholic, being a Christian in my Western and my British context, to then come to this Amerindian community and to say, oh, the same gospel, the same invitation to love one another as Christ has loved us. Oh, that's into the heart. That's the heart of the gospel. That's the heart of our faith. It's not Thomas Aquinas and great theological theses and reflections on the mystery of how the Trinity is interrelated. No, here it is lived out and the practical implications of following Jesus Christ and knowing God's love for us revealed in the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Something that makes sense to the people. It's not something you have to explain or teach them. It's something we celebrate together by living that together in community. So, that beautiful experience of living and sharing the life of the people over that time. But living that along this small, isolated place in Guyana. The beautiful process now beginning over the last 5-6 years with Pope Francis. Pope Francis, who writes that beautiful letter, Laudato Si', calling our attention to care for our common home. And this is beautiful reflection. What are we doing in the West? How is our lifestyle of consumerism, our colonial project, what we're doing to our planet, how is that not in harmony, not in balance? And it's contrasting with this life in community here, in one sense, here is what it is to live the gospel. And how can we now have that dialogue and that conversation so that, well, we can hear the gospel anew, we can hear the gospel fresh, and say, well, what is it going to look like if we're going to live it here in our own context? We are concerned about climate change, we are concerned about consumerism, we are concerned about the tensions and the fragmentation and what it is to be British, and are we going to be part of Europe, not part of Europe? All of those complex questions, how can we hear again that invitation from Christ to love one another, to be able to be brothers and sisters in our difference. We don't have to be all homogeneous, all the same, and thinking of anybody that's different from us as a threat. We can be united together as a community in our difference. That great invitation. So, Pope Francis wanting now this experience of what it is to live the gospel in a very different context, in a very different culture, a very different way of life, now to be able to be reflected on through our universal church. So that we can now start reflecting on the heart of the gospel. So, we don't have to be thinking, well, what are the Amerindian people supposed to be doing? They're getting on with their life, very good. We have to be thinking, well, what are the challenges for us if we're going to be followers of Jesus Christ? And that's the process now that Pope Francis has invited, offered us Laudato Si' to open our eyes, and particularly to open our ears to what's happening in our world. Do we hear the cry of the poor? Do we hear the cry of the earth? And how are we going to respond to that cry? And as part of that process, it's then to say, okay, so let's focus our attention now on the Amazon. Let's listen to what has been happening there. Let's listen to how the gospel is being lived and responded to there. And Mauricio, he's living the other side of the Amazon. Another country you might not be too sure where it is, but in Ecuador. Mauricio is from Mexico originally, but now living in Ecuador, working for Caritas, and invited through Caritas to look at what's happening in Ecuador. How is the church in Ecuador responding to our challenges of the life in the Amazon and indigenous communities? And out of that care and concern for responding to the needs in Ecuador, beginning a conversation on what's happening in Colombia, what's happening in Peru, what's happening in Brazil, how can we come together? How can we form a network so that we can help one another in this, responding to these challenges? And Pope Francis inviting this network, VPAM, this Mauricio is the executive secretary of, to now help the church to collect that experience and collect that wealth of living of the gospel, and help that conversation come to the centre, come to Rome, and to enrich reflection for our whole universal church as to how we can move forward. So, I'm the warm back. Now we have the next speaker.
Thanks very much, Paul. That saves me. The introduction. Yours is so much more elegant than anything that I could have said about Mauricio. So, without further ado, Mauricio Lopez, the Executive Secretary of REPAM.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you very much. Let me just set this up. And I'm going to time myself as I always do, so I make sure I don't hold you here for too long. So I want to thank you for the opportunity to talk to you today among friends, brothers, and sisters. I'm delighted to re-encounter my brothers in this way of life, CLC, and it's really a gift to have you here. And at the same time, in the Society of Jesus, we've been working together, as Paul was mentioning, in this journey to respond to the challenges of the world today, and of course with Catholic. Claire, Julian, they've been around helping us to find a way to respond together to this urgent appeal. So I think what I want to say first, many of you might have already experienced the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius of Loyola. In that experience, there is a very important contemplation. And this is when the Holy Trinity is looking down on earth and seeing the disaster that we are living. Seeing how this gift that He has given us and the Trinity has given us is being lost because we cannot find our own way. We cannot find our vocation. We cannot find what is our call, our true call. So rather than just running away from this gift that we were given, the Trinity decides to come down. And it recognizes the diversity, the colors, the different dresses, those who are happy, those who are living in sorrow. And the Trinity decides to give Himself, herself, to go and to take part in our reality. I think this is the invitation today in terms of caring for our common home. To look with the eyes of God. How is God looking this reality and inviting us through His incarnation to collaborate in the protection of this common home. This is not about the Amazon in the map that we saw. At least not only about it. It is about the future of all humankind. And this is what's bringing us together. Why should we be talking about the Amazon here in London? Well, because the future of the Amazon is very deeply, profoundly linked with our own future. So I'll be presenting to you a number of information, some information that might be interesting for you, so you can see the connection. But the most important thing is, how does that invite you to get involved, to change, to participate in this call to redeem humankind, which means to open new possibilities when we feel that we've lost any path. So I want to start with a phrase also from Teilhard de Chardin, a Jesuit who was not very well understood during these times. He was actually confronted by his own church. Even the Society of Jesus could not really understand what he was trying to do. There was a very difficult debate on this dialogue between science and religion, which for us might seem something that it flows quite easily, but not back then. 60 years ago, 70 years ago, this was a serious problem. And he was trying to invite the church to understand how important it is to understand where we come from, and to embrace that as part of the mystery of God. He was inviting us to understand how every single particle created in this world expresses the divinity. How every single living organism was also an expression of God, of the mystery of God, of the unrevealed mystery, which we are invited to continue deepening. And through our rationality, we cannot understand. We need to understand it through the eyes of our own faith. So he was inviting us to do that. Many times he was asked to make things easier for everyone, and they told him a number of times, why don't you just give up this being a Jesuit part and continue doing your work as a paleontologist and dedicate your life to science? And he said, I will be failing to respond to my most important call if I did. I am convinced that anything I do, everything I do is connected to my call. And my core call comes from this invitation to find Jesus Christ in also the process of evolution. Indigenous communities have also taught us that. All of those who have been in the Amazon can notice and they recognize how this has been part of their own journey. But I think it's important to enter into this mystery. And this phrase of Teilhard de Chardin, I think is really, really significant. And he said, we are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. The mystery of incarnation. The call to understand the mystery of God in our midst is revealed in this phrase. So I don't know if you've heard the word kairos. Many people say that we are in a kairos moment. Have you heard that word? Some have, some haven't. Well, I felt that I couldn't explain it to you. My English is not that good. So I felt the need to call somebody who is an expert. She's an expert, a theologian, which I think you will find very suitable to listen to. And I want you to pay attention, really, to every word she says. I will be asking you questions after that. So I want you to focus and see what is the single most important word that you can get from what this theologian is saying. And I think it's going to be an invitation to understand what kairos means. Okay, so I'm just going to share with you this speed. It's only 30 minutes long, so I hope it's okay with you. Yes?
My dear, this is where I dream to hold you in my arms. I dream to hold you in my arms. Hold you in my arms. I wait in my arms.
Now I'm going to ask you, what is the single most important word that you heard from this theologian explaining kairos? Does anybody want to just say one word that comes to your heart after looking at this video? One word, no explanation, just what does this echo in your heart in one word?
Wonder.
Wonder.
Amazement. Joy.
Yes.
Well, there are some things that you can't simply explain, and you need to find the capacity of wondering, of recognizing the mystery of God. And theology is this. We can find many books about this. This is a little girl who's experiencing rain for the first time. And you can see in her face how she's telling us how the experience is really touching her, but she cannot talk. But she says more in the way, and by the way she responds to this experience of God than any possible theological explanation. So when we are called to respond to this caring for our common home, we need to go back to be like that. We need to be childlike to understand what is at stake. And yes, of course, we know the numbers, we know the data, we know the scientific information, but it's about going back to the sense of wonder and fighting for it as she did. She was taken away, she fought back. She wanted to get back to it and explaining something that cannot be explained. That is kairos. So people say that this synod is a kairos moment. Well, I think this is a good way to explain it. It is a possibility of a moment in time in which the mystery is present, and we need to be able to feel it, to accompany it. Otherwise, we might lose it. And what's at stake, as I said, is the future of our common home. So we usually function in our lives with the chronos dynamic, and that is the material time, the registering every step we take, urge to get to places, to get things done, to success, and we lose the capacity to see beyond, like the Holy Trinity looking down on earth and finding a way to redeem our reality, to give hope. So Pope Francis is appealing to us to care for our common home. And he says it is time for an ecological conversion. And he also says that this is an ethical imperative. We absolutely have to respond to this, and we are to do it together. So I'm going to tell you 3 words that I want you to keep in your heart as entering into this synodal process. The first one is metanoia, which means a radical conversion of the heart. That is going down to the roots. No possibility will take place as to change our reality if we don't go through a personal conversion. We can have 10 more beautiful encyclicals. We can have those very, very appealing movements of the youth saying that we need to change, but if it doesn't really touch our inner being and produces a change, there will be no future. This is about a conversion. It has to be a personal conversion, a true conversion. No one can force you to do that. It has to come from within. So this is the first invitation. The second one is the word alterity, the otherness. There is no way that we can find meaning in life and sense the mystery unless we do it with others. The only way that we can find our pathway in our life is also through others and with others. Can we also include in this category of the others to our sister Mother Earth? Pope Francis is insisting that she is another, and we need to acknowledge her as such and recognize our own being, our possibilities to continue through her and with her. And the third word that I want to share with you is parresia. This is all from our tradition too. It's the courage to respond to this reality. We can have a personal conversion. We can recognize this mystery in an experience with the others. But if there's no response, an actual response as coming out, this is the church that goes forth in Evangelii Gaudium, nothing will change. So we need to recognize ourselves in this invitation. Okay, so I have another short video of the Pope when he addressed the General Assembly of the United Nations and also the social movements. He made a very, very concrete appeal for all the Catholic Church and for all humankind to respond together. So let's just see it from Pope Francis and see what he says.
La casa común de todos nosotros está siendo saqueada, devastada, dejada impunemente. La cobardía en su defensa es un pecado grave. Vemos con decepción creciente cómo se suceden una tras otra las cumbres internacionales sin ningún resultado importante. Existe un claro, definitivo y postergable imperativo ético de actuar que no se está cumpliendo. No se puede permitir que ciertos intereses, que son globales, no universales, se impongan, sometan a los estados y organismos internacionales y continúen destruyendo la creación. Los pueblos y sus movimientos están llamados a clamar, a movilizar, a exigir pacífica pero tenazmente la adopción urgente de medidas apropiadas. Yo les pido, en nombre de Dios, que defiendan a la Madre Tierra.
On November 30th, world leaders will meet in the Paris Climate Summit to start negotiating the next treaty to tackle climate change, the existential threat of our generation.
So I'll stop it there. This was part of the preparation towards COP21. And I think the invitation from Pope Francis leaves no room for hesitation. It's a very clear and concrete invitation, and I think he's now probably one of the, or perhaps the only, world leader inviting for other movements to join and to do this with an ethical approach. So I think this is something that needs to be very clear. Also together with this radical conversion, which means radical going into the root of the heart, the recognition of the other and Sister Mother Earth as another, and the parresia, the going forth, the going out, the acting out, also recognizing that this is an invitation for the Catholic Church. Laudato Si is not just a reflection on ecology. It's part of the social teaching of the Church. So it should be just as important as many other documents that we consider as crucial in our being Catholics. And not only that, this is an invitation for all humankind, beyond our own beliefs. So why would the Pope call for a synod on the Amazon if it's something that's related to a territory as Father Paul was talking about? First of all, have you heard the word synod before? Yes? Well, synod actually means walking together. And that seems like something very simple. But it's very, we have our own directions. We want to go in our own dynamic. And this is an invitation to stop for a moment, to focus on something that's very important for the church and try to walk together. In our case, in the Amazon, it's been very difficult to convey this common effort because everyone expects to get something sometimes. And they expect to provide with some results for their own institutions. Some expect to have their charisma to be more noticed, when in fact, what's at stake is really this future as a humankind. So the idea of synodality is also an invitation for all of us, starting here, to walk together. And the title of the synod is Amazonia, New Ways for the Church and for an Integral Ecology. So this is also seems something very simple. Well, but what does it mean, new ways? That means doing things differently, finding ways to respond in a different way to a reality in which we seem to have failed to accompany or to transform. And integral ecology becomes an essential part of our mission as Catholics and also as members of this one. So let me just share with you a few elements regarding the Synod on the Amazon. So here are some images which might help. The Amazon used to be the backyard of the planet. It was considered a place which was empty, which we needed to conquer, to civilize, to dominate. But in fact, these days it changed. It came from being the backyard of the planet to become the main square. There are many interests around this territory. It's coveted and disputed. So the question that we are asking ourselves, after listening also to Pope Francis, is what is our prophetic mission? How will we respond to this invitation to walk together around this concrete reality, which is also connected to us, and find new ways for the church and for an integral ecology? So, as Paul was mentioning, it is actually 9 countries which integrate the Amazon basin. Usually we think about the Amazon and we might think about Brazil, but it's actually 9 different countries. And for example, you can see Ecuador, where I live. It accounts for 1.5% of the total Pan-Amazon territory. But it actually, if you go to where I am in Ecuador, it's half of the total of the national territory. 50% of the national territory of Ecuador is considered part of the Amazon. So whatever happens to that territory will have a direct impact in those who live in there, but not only there. Same thing with Colombia, Venezuela. They might account for smaller percentages, but the fact is that it's more than half of their national territories taking part in the whole of the Amazon territory. This is an image that I always use, trying to help people understand why is it so important for all of us. And this is the water, the hydrographic data. It's more than 20%, or some say it could be somewhere between 15% to 20-something% of the fresh water which humans can consume in the planet, which is not frozen. So that means that every single person or living being which also connected to life through water is needs to thank the Amazon for 20% of that water. I always say 1 out of 5 glasses of water that you drink any day is thanks to the Amazon. So it's really somehow a way to make a connection. Okay. The primary forests in the planet, those forests that continue to be as they were from the very beginning, we've lost most of them in the world. And 34% of those primary forests are in the Amazon. Another big part of them is in the Congo Basin, which is being really affected in the past decades and years, and also in the Asia-Pacific region, especially Indonesia, the Philippines, and that accounts for 22%. But it has another color because this is also very much affected by the palm oil industries that are taking down all of the tropical forests there. 1/3 of the total biodiversity in the planet is in the Amazon. And the species, 300 species of mammals, 1,300 species of birds, and 1,500 species of fish. There is a huge biodiversity there, but especially the people who live there. They used to say that this was an empty space, that we needed to conquer it, when in fact it has 33 million people living there today, out of which 3 million represent indigenous communities. 3 million people, part of almost 400 indigenous nationalities. Each and every one of those with a particular identity, history, tradition, even a specific language. There are 240 languages in the Amazon. And you probably have heard about the uncontacted indigenous communities. In the world, the numbers say that there are about 150 of them left. Those indigenous communities which have decided not to have any contact with Western societies. Out of 150 in the world, about 140 of them are in the Amazon basin. What is our prophetic call as Catholic Church? Do they have a possibility to live? Our decisions elsewhere are impacting them. The oil industries, the mining corporations, and we are not against development. But it's just about the integral human development and how we achieve equality, a proper distribution, and of course the possibility to have a future. In this case, the uncontacted indigenous peoples, they are being affected directly by this desire of getting more and more of their lands. They say that this is a genocide that's already happening there. And those are stories like, for example, in Ecuador, they found the bodies of some of those indigenous communities, and they couldn't do anything about it. Not even file that as to start a process of investigation, because they did not exist in the eyes of the Ecuadorian state. They had no identity. They did not exist. They were not registered. So this shows us how limited we are sometimes to understand those other realities. Can we go back to the eyes of that little girl, trying to understand the mystery of life, which is also represented in those indigenous communities, and find a way to together provide them with the possibilities to continue living? And the problem and the invitation, the challenge, is actually to see and review our own way of living, our lifestyles, everywhere. This is not for those here living in England. It's just about the same in Quito, in the capital city of Ecuador, or in Mexico. Of course, the different economic capacities do make a difference, but I think it's very important to see that the way we have decided to understand life and development has no future as it is. If everyone was to live exactly like some German society do, or the United States, today we would be needing about 7 planets. Even today, we are using and abusing our planet, and in terms of a proportion of 1.5 planets. So we are already going past what the capacity of our planet to heal herself can hold. So today, we're already in a very, very alarming situation. So as I said, this idea of development, which is unlimited, does not match with a limited planet. If we continue like this, of course, some of those indigenous communities will be the first ones to suffer. But this is not about what happens in the Amazon or ideological position. It's not left or right. It's about the future of the planet. The Pope is very clear about this. This is about the justice with other generations. and the way we're doing things shows us that we cannot continue like this. What can I do where I am in my daily life to change this progressively? And how can I feel the connection? Laudato Si has this mantra. It is repeated many, many times during the encyclical. Everything is connected. So the invitation is to feel the connection with all those realities. Remember the glass of water? 1 out of 5. This is actually a giant water pump. It is not just a magic trick for the water to be produced. It is a very complex system. And of course, as I said, it offers the possibility for life to many, many people around the world. You see this map. You can see the deserts of Atacama, Kalahari, and Australia in the southern hemisphere. But what happens below the Amazonian? Why don't we have a huge desert in Argentina, Paraguay, Brazil, and Uruguay? They're actually very productive. And in fact, they should be a desert. Well, this is connected with the Amazon. What happens in South America is this, that we have the tropical forest, which produces this enormous quantity of water, and we have the Andes, the highlands, the high mountains, which help the distribution of the rains to actually reach all of the southern part of the continent, and also in the northern part. If the Amazon wasn't there, this would be a desert. So, as in any other thing, when you have all of the biodiversity in the tropical forest, this water pump functions perfectly. But as we go and continue to deforest the Amazon, we will end up becoming a real savanna. This is also happening already in some places. They say that when we reach 40% of deforestation, this water system will be completely broken. Today, some say that we are somewhere in between 20 to 25% in terms of deforestation. Okay, I'm just going to I want you to see this image. Everything that you see in pink color is deforestation already happening. This is the 20-25% that I was talking about. So, I have a few last minutes. Why would the Pope call for a synod on this territory? Well, exactly because of this. And why are we invited to be a part of it? Well, because this is an invitation to be a synodal church. So he is inviting all of the Catholic Church, and especially those living in the Amazon, to reflect on how to respond to this. And not to remain there. How does this can enlighten other realities, such as our context here in Europe in general, and what can we do to change this situation? I remember very well with talking to Pope Francis. I was privileged to be, I still have the privilege to participate in the preparation for the Synod. And he came to us while we were drinking coffee, and he said, please pay attention to this. The periphery becomes the center. And this means, how does this reality and the spirituality of the indigenous people and the fragility of this territory call for a change in our reality in the center, in Rome? So he wants the Amazon to talk to the church globally, to have a response to this presence of God, the mystery of God in this territory. So the invitation today is this. We want you to feel part of it. This is not about feeling broken and with the idea that we cannot do anything. Pope Francis is very clear also in the encyclical saying we're still on time to do something. The United Nations are also pointing out what are the implications of not changing in the coming 10, 20 years. But we need to find a way to work together. Here, I heard this movement, Extinction Rebellion, and you had also Greta coming from Sweden after she had met the Pope or before she had met the Pope, there are some very beautiful signs of hope, invitation to change from the youth. And I think the voice of Greta becomes very important, not because we had not heard this before, because she's very clear in saying, it is my future, and the future of those coming after me, which is going to be affected. You need to do something now. Stop talking and stop analyzing. Do something. Well, this is the same voice of the indigenous communities. And they want the church to continue to be there with them, to be an ally, to make sure that we can respond to this together. So yesterday we had a very, very interesting session with some of the local organizations like Catholic, some institutions also of the Society of Jesus. I'd like to invite, of course, CLC, my community. We've had ecology as one of our priorities for the past years, to come together, to try to find concrete responses, to be aware of the discussions taking place in Rome, because the results of those will also come back to us and invite us to find solutions. So I don't want to take more of your time. I suppose that there could be some questions from your side, but I would invite you to read with me, all of us together, this prayer from Laudato Si.